Well, good morning. Well, some predicted that libraries would one day disappear because of the growth of the internet and other technologies. That's not the case in many communities in the Upper Peninsula, including Marquette. Today we'll get the real story from a librarian, and it starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, today's library is not the library we knew as kids. I'll have more to say about that later. Marquette's Peter White Public Library has made that transition, and today is the largest in northern Michigan. Today we'll learn about the role it plays in the community and some of the challenges it faces as we talk with Library Director Andrea Ingmeyer. Andrea, welcome to the Ryan Report.
Thank you, Don. It's nice to be here.
Nice to have you with us. Okay, a little bit about you. It looks like you spent most of your life in Indiana. Were you born there?
I was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
born a Hoosier.
Born a Hoosier. And went to school in Indiana at Ball State and Indiana University?
Yep.
Were you interested in libraries when you were a kid, or did that come later?
I was. I didn't realize that it was such a appropriate career choice for me until I got much older. But as a child, I spent a lot of time walking to our small public library in my hometown of Fowler, tiny little library right down the road from where we lived. So I walked there a lot. My grandfather was on the library board for 16 years.
Okay.
And so libraries have been a big part of my family.
Okay, and continue to be.
Yep.
I noticed that I kind of want to read this because you said in 2005 you became an accidental library director
Yes.
for a very small library in southern Indiana. There must be a story there.
Yeah, I was working at the Indiana State Library, and my sister-in-law, she was in the hospital. She worked in the hospital as a speech therapist, and she knew another coworker in the hospital was on a library board for the Osgood Public Library, and they had lost their director kind of quickly, and they were in the middle of a construction project, and they were really scrambling to get applicants. A lot of times small libraries have a hard time attracting candidates for a director position because it's challenging work. You do everything. It's just a different dynamic for a library position. And she knew that I was a librarian, had just finished library school a couple years previous. So my sister-in-law actually came to me and said, "So I know somebody on the library board and they'd like you to apply for the position." And I said, "No way. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a library director." I liked working as a reference librarian and I liked being at the state library. But I applied anyway, because why not?
And you said they were in the midst of an expansion.
They were, yeah.
And a library director, you know, has more to do than just library things. A lot of management and administrative issues, I'm sure.
Right, which is why I wasn't sure I really wanted to get involved. I liked the library work and didn't think I'd be interested in the administration part. But as it turns out, I like it a lot. So
in 2016, there was a big change in your life, and the fact that you were hired to become the library director in Marquette. Besides being a librarian, you're also a wife and a mother.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
What enticed you to bring your family to Marquette at that point in your life?
Well, the year before, my husband and I, we do a lot of outdoor activities. The year before, we had taken a Boundary Waters canoe trip with our kids, and we were out for a week and a half in the Boundary Waters and hiking and canoeing, and you know, every night we'd sit by the campfire and try not to get bit by too many bugs and talk about how we wanted to move north. And after that trip, we decided, you know, we don't really want to wait till we retire. That was always kind of our plan, to retire and move north. And we decided we wanted to do it while we could still do things like the Boundary Waters trip. So we just kind of threw it out there to see what would happen,
and lo and behold, Marquette was looking for a director.
Yeah.
After I think 25 years, the
right.
previous director.
Right. Yeah.
So you had some big shoes to step into right off the bat.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Pam left some very, very big shoes.
She's
a hard act to follow.
Are you enjoying life in the Upper Peninsula?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Very much. You know, oftentimes when we name buildings or institutions for people, it's kind of questionable as to why. I look back at the history.
Yeah.
And the fact that the library started with a donation of $5,000 from Peter White, later moved to a building which he owned,
right,
and then moved to another building that he gave to the city. Peter White really wanted to have a library in Marquette, didn't he?
He most certainly did, yeah.
And he had a huge impact on this community. You know, I said at the top of the show that while some predicted libraries might disappear, and this is back a couple of decades, you know, as technology was really moving ahead, that has not been the case in many cases, including here at Peter White. What have been the changes that have made that possible?
There's a couple. Libraries embraced the technology. I think I'm not sure that people understood that libraries would do that. And so instead of it becoming a competition with Google or a competition with the internet, libraries really embraced it and decided to take the role of teacher and educator for their communities. So instead of competing with technology, libraries adopted it, started showing people how to use it. So they became partners with the technology. And I think some of the early predictions that were made about libraries were really predicting the extinction of libraries based on libraries would have no value, technology would take everything over. And what I don't think anyone anticipated is how many people wouldn't just know how to use technology. So somebody had to show them, and libraries really took on that role, and it's not changed. We have people every day who come in, they need to fill out a job application, they need to do some kind of function online, and they don't know how to do it. So libraries really became an instructor for technology. So there's that aspect. But one of the other things that I think really has maintained relevancy for libraries is the programming. And Peter White, as I'm sure you know, we're always busy with programs. And that, I think, is one of the biggest reasons why libraries have remained relevant is we're more than the books. So the books are great, and a lot of people come in and use our materials and videos and books and everything, but the programming and the development of community, being a place where people come together, is really important. And that's part of why libraries are still so relevant.
Okay, we'll pick up on that in just a couple of minutes.
Sure.
We'll be back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Again, our guest this morning is Andrea Ingmeyer, the director of the Peter White Public Library. We were talking just a minute ago about how really libraries have become kind of hubs to the community. You really have a lot of entertaining and informative kind of functions that go on there as well, don't you?
Oh, we do. We're very fortunate to have funding that was set aside for the library many, many years ago by the Carol Paul family, and that trust money has really allowed us to do a lot of the music programming that we do. That money was set aside specifically for music type functions at the library, and so it supplements our collection, and it also helps us to provide the programming that we do. I get asked by a lot of other libraries, how do you afford to do all this? And we're very fortunate to have money set aside for that programming, because music programming is expensive.
And obviously there are times when you just provide the facility, and others come in and provide a program.
Absolutely, yeah.
That fits in with what you're trying to do.
We partner with a lot of groups, and they come in and do a program, and we help promote it, and it works out well for everybody.
The library went through a major expansion, and that was completed in about 2000, I think. And we won't spend a lot of time talking about that. But it certainly did bring the Peter White Library into the modern age.
Yeah, yeah.
The thing now, though, is you're in a major building project.
We are. As
I understand, it's an over $4 million project. What's the general purpose of that? And this involves more of the old structure, I understand.
It's the whole building. So it started with the old structure. It started with the 1904 building. When I came on board, actually a couple years before, Pam had recognized that there was an issue with the exterior of the building. And so when I came on board, we decided that we needed to really come up with a plan for fixing the building. And what we have found through the project is that the facade was actually falling off. And we thought the foundation was a problem, but fortunately it wasn't the foundation. So, whew. Yeah. But we did have to repair the facade of the building. They've done a lot of other structural work to prevent that same thing from happening on other parts of the old building. So that's where the project started. We knew we had this issue that we had to tackle. And so as we were planning for how we were going to fund this, we started doing some community surveys and getting input from people who use the library as to what could be better, what needs updated, what things can we change to make the library more useful for people, and that helped us really focus in on the rest of the project. So we are replacing carpet. We are, the lower level of the library is getting a pretty good facelift. Youth Services is getting more space. We've replaced the atrium windows that are on the parking lot side of the building. They were pretty much like little greenhouses attached to the building, so very difficult for heating and cooling. They were leaking, so we put on flat roofs on those atrium windows to keep the natural light, but allow the spaces to be more useful. So really trying to tackle some big heating and cooling issues, lighting, anything we can do to make the building a little bit more cost efficient to run, and then providing additional spaces for the programs, but also the parts of the library that people find the most value.
And so I think the upstairs will kind of stay the same, but you are making some changes downstairs and how that space will be used. What can people look forward to there?
So the thing that I feel like people are going to be the most excited about are when you come down the stairs to the lower level, you'll be able to see everything that's available. So previously, when you came down one set of stairs, you saw a long hallway. And when you came down the other set of the stairs, you had the Small Works Gallery for arts and culture. So it was very difficult if you were new to the library to know where to go. So when you come down the stairs now, it's open. There's a reception area at the bottom of the stairs. And so you'll see where arts and culture is, you'll see the door to the community room, and you'll see the entrance to Youth Services. So Youth Services is getting more space. We're adding a dedicated programming room in the Youth Services department, so that should open up our other rooms for community use. A lot of times we would have even small children program scheduled for the community room because there wasn't another place to put them. So we feel like it'll really open up our meeting room space for the public.
And I should mention, we'll be talking about finances somewhat in the next segment of our show. But this project is being financed by a bond that was approved by voters.
Right, so City of Marquette voters.
It's being paid for by the City of Marquette voters.
It is,
and City of Marquette residents.
Yep.
And that bond money can only be used for this project. It can't be used for operating costs.
Correct, correct.
So.
Yeah, bond money has to go to capital projects.
Okay. We'll talk about your concern about raising money for operations in the next segment. We'll be back to talk about that in just 2 minutes. Once again, our guest this morning is Andrea Ingmeyer from the Peter White Public Library, director of the library. Let's talk about, we're just past the primary elections, but now a very important election is coming up in November, even more so important for the Peter White Public Library. First of all, we should let people know that besides the city, there are other townships involved in the library as well, right?
We have township contracts with Chocolate, Sands, Scandia, West Branch, and Marquette.
And that means those residents get full use of the library services.
They do, and they each have a millage.
And so they each pay to be part of it.
They do.
Now, coming up in November, you've got a couple of different kinds of elections. In 2 of the townships, Marquette and Big Bay Perkins.
Powell,
I'm sorry. They are actually out to renew their millage, is that right?
Marquette is out to renew the millage. Powell is a new service millage. We had a service contract with Powell several years ago, and it failed in 2014, and so we're back on the ballot in Powell Township.
Okay, and this will be an opportunity for, in case of Marquette Township, for those people to continue to maintain their relationship with the library, and for Powell a chance to get back involved.
That's right, that's right.
So these are very important, I'm sure. We also have these Headley Amendments, and maybe you can explain to our audience what the Headley Amendment's all about.
So the Headley Amendment is a piece of legislation that helps to cap residential property tax growth. So I'm fond of saying it's not a bad piece of legislation, because what it does is it, as the taxable value of an area grows, the rate that that residents pay goes down. Right. So it actually is good for the residents. But what it doesn't allow the governmental units to do is really capture that growth that's happening in the community. So the Headley override is a vote that asks residents to reset the millage to the original rate. So as an example, in Chocolate Township, residents pay almost 3/4 of a mill because of the amount of rollback in the township. And our contract with Chocolate Township is for 1 mill. So each township's different, each service area is different based on the growth. Chocolate is our biggest growth township, so the rollback is the largest. City of Marquette is a 1.5 millage rate, and it's rolled back to like 1.36,
Okay.
several decimals.
All right.
Yeah, so we'll have individual ballot measures on the ballot for City of Marquette, Chocolate Township, and Sands Township.
Why is it so important to the library that these millages be approved or renewed or whatever the case may be in each instance?
Well, for the last several years, I'm sure a lot of people remember the dark stores. When those first hit, the library was very proactive in letting people know that our operating revenue was going down as a result of some of these tax tribunals and the dark store, what's been now commonly called the dark store issue.
Right.
And so the library is right now operating about $85,000 annually less than where we could be. And a lot of that is due to the closing of We Energies. We Energies has, the Presque Isle plant has settled with the City of Marquette several times. And the last 2 settlements have been about $30,000 each. And between the Presque Isle plant and the move of the hospital from the city, from its current location in the city to a brownfield, collectively we're facing about another $140,000 in annual revenue lost. So we're trying to be proactive and make up some of that revenue before it's completely gone, so that we don't have to have, drastic cuts to services. Back when the tax tribunals first hit and the library was required to pay back money, we closed on Sundays. We lost an hour of operation in the mornings, and we don't want to be in that position again. We're trying to proactively raise revenue so that we can be in a stable funding place.
And you really depend substantially on the property tax for your revenue, right?
We do.
Are there other sources?
We fundraise, so we raise over 10% of our budget annually. And we do have some, like I said, the Carol Paul Trust, which provides about $30,000 annually to the library's budget. We also receive money from penal fines and a little bit of money from the state. And then the City of Marquette does offer us revenue sharing. So between all of that, that makes up about 20% of the budget. But we do rely very heavily on property taxes.
So with these millage elections, you're not looking for any expansion, new projects or new undertakings, but basically to maintain the services you have now?
We are, yep.
Okay, so this will be a pretty critical vote in those townships and in the City of Marquette.
It is, yeah.
Well, obviously the Peter White Library is a very popular place in Marquette. So thanks for coming in this morning and talking to us about it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Yeah.
We look forward to doing it again sometime.
Okay.
I'll be back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Well, our discussion this morning about the library brought back some memories for me. Growing up in Ishpeming, I remember the Carnegie Public Library, which was and still is a fixture in the community. The building I remember, which is still the home of the library today, also dates back to 1904. It wasn't a hangout for teenagers, but it was occasionally a place where you could meet friends or spend some time when you were just looking for a way to entertain yourself, or sometimes to work on a school project. Of course, the internet was not available as a source of information back then, but the library had a lot of reference books, including several versions of the encyclopedia. The most persistent memory I have from those days was how serious the people in charge were about keeping it quiet. When you spoke to a librarian, she would speak in an almost whisper, and they expected you to do the same. If you didn't maintain the quiet, you would definitely be scolded. In fact, I think there were at least a few occasions when my teenage friends and I were asked to leave, even though our only crime was to talk a little too loud. I'm quite certain the most common word heard in the library back then was It was almost as if the other patrons who were there couldn't possibly read if there was any noise at all. I hate to admit it, as a teenager and even as a young man, it was hard for me to understand why they carried the need for quiet to such extremes. You actually even learn to not just speak quietly, but to do everything without making a sound. Outside the library, we were used to reading with the radio or TV and a lot of other things going on in the background. I often wondered what the librarians did when they left after work. After speaking in a whispered tone all day, did they speak loudly when they were away from the job? Did they shout as they walked out the door? Of course, this was not just an Ishpeming thing. Most libraries were pretty much the same. I know when I got into a library now, I can speak pretty much like I do anywhere else. But I'm not sure when it changed, and in fact, I don't know if it has changed in every community. I imagine there are still some where quiet is the order of the day. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. There should be places in the library where people can read or study without a lot of distractions. But most libraries today are a very different place from the times I remember. In many communities, they're a hub of activity. They still have the books and people still read, but they have become so much more. I know this, however, if the librarians who man the desk at the Carnegie Public Library when I was a teenager went to the library today, and I'm sure this is true at many other places around the country, they would be shocked. People actually speaking in a normal tone of voice. Shh. That's not the library I remember. I'll be back in a minute. The Today Show is just a moment away, and before we go, let me remind you that your best source for news anytime is UpperMichiganSource.com. You can also find this show at that same address, available as a live stream on Sunday morning and an internet broadcast starting on Monday afternoon. Thanks to Andrea Ingmeyer for coming in today to share some thoughts about libraries. And thank you for joining us. Let's make a date to meet at the same time, same spot, next Sunday morning.